Hey, friends, welcome to another episode for this series on becoming a future ready church for Exponential Next. And in this episode, we're going to discuss the first of 8 shifts that we think will help churches move forward to a brighter future. And that shift is going from attendance to attachment. And the conversation that we're asking here, or we're talking about here, is driven by this question: why church membership is losing its appeal and what's replacing it. And a lot of pastors I know are struggling with the idea that like less and less people are coming to church. Now, there are some churches that are seeing a surge in attendance, especially coming out of COVID, because a lot of churches close their doors and they're absorbing in other members. And there are some other churches that are experiencing a spike in attendance because of various different reasons. But there's a vast number of pastors that continue to struggle year after year, decade after decade, of seeing attendance becoming less and less crucial. For instance, even your most committed church members may be coming to church less and less every year. We're going to talk about the importance of attachment and why, for most people, the idea of being able to securely have intimate relationships is actually driving how they think about belonging. A lot of this is driven through the understanding that membership as a subscription, that paradigm is fading away. Rather than emphasizing how do we grow membership and just grow weekly attendance, we need to strive to help people develop healthy spiritual relationships amid their very complex lives. Research is showing clearly that the percentage of those who are going to church every year continues to decline. But that doesn't have to be the narrative. As churches continue to invest in spaces where people feel like they belong, we think that we're going to see the lag indicator continue to grow. My name is Daniel Yang, National Director of Churches of Welcome at World Relief.
And I'm Warren Bird, Senior Vice President of Research at ECFA, the Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability. And I'm the author or co-author of 35 books for church leaders.
And I'm Adelle Banks, a veteran religion journalist. I'm the project's editor and a national reporter at Religion News Service.
And we wrote a book together, released by Zonner in October 2024, called Becoming a Future Ready Church: 8 Shifts to Encourage and Empower the Next Generation of Leaders.
And Daniel, in your introduction, you just covered a lot of ground on this shift from attendance to attachment, from membership to belonging. And while everyone is familiar with the long, steady decline that you referenced in formal church membership, that part is not news for Christians. And it doesn't take a rocket science. And yes, we have lots of graphs in the book that depict it very specifically, but it doesn't take a rocket science both to be aware of that and also to itemize other factors that accompany what happens when you have a decline in membership. You have a decline in giving, a decline in volunteering, and so many other things. But our book is about the why. Why is that changing? And are there antidotes? Are there alternatives that are happening at the same time that's underneath these numbers about membership decline? And the shift to belonging, to attachment. Well, an example, scholar Elizabeth Drescher, author of Choosing Our Religion, The Spiritual Lives of America's Nuns, helps us understand that the nuns, that's not Catholic women with hats, but no religious preference, are not a monolithic group. She debunks the notion that nuns are primarily individualistic atheists and agnostics who reject religion, morality, and ethics. Rather, nuns, people not affiliated with another faith, are with a particular faith, are capable of experiencing spiritual practices and belonging without an ecclesial-like gathering. So, in a way, that raises the question for Christians: does that sense of belonging always go and accompanying ecclesial membership? Could it be that Christians today are valuing the idea of wanting to belong more than they value having a formal membership? And we think yes, and that's why we named this shift from attendance to attachment. Adelle wrote about a church that exemplified this shift. It's named Life.Church.
Yes, Warren. For becoming a future-ready church, I interviewed Kevin Penry, who was a longtime member of the leadership team of Life.Church and now is a consultant. That church began in 1996 in Edmond, Oklahoma, and back then, like so many others, the people in his congregation were known as members. Penry told me at that point, membership was a big deal. Members were asked to annually commit to covenant that they would attend, give, and serve their church, and take part in a small group. But in the mid-2000s, the church's senior pastor took an unusual step on its Commitment Sunday. He invited 5 other churches in his local area to set up tables in the lobby, so attendees who might have been questioning if Life.Church was for them could learn about other church options. Penry said church leaders were thankful that few people left and the church continued to grow. But sensing a shift in today's culture, the church's leadership decided to move away from traditional membership. Church leaders say their focus has become helping people take next steps in their faith journey, serving in some way, giving, or finding community. This is how they sum up one of their values. Quote, "We are spiritual contributors, not spiritual consumers. The church does not exist for us. We are the church and we exist for the world." End quote. They encourage attenders to be aware of others, especially non-Christians who have entered their worship spaces. And Life.Church's local pastors introduce themselves each week, and first-timers are told not to worry about making a donation as the offering bucket is passed. Life.Church is a multi-site church with locations across the country and an online community. Its pastor and innovation leader, Craig Groeschel, works to connect with its global audience as a way of enhancing that sense of belonging. He'll make reference to a Life.Church campus in New York or Kansas or Florida, or ask people in its online community to respond to sermons in the chat. Kevin Penry, the member of the church's early leadership team who I interviewed, said the key is not membership, but engagement. And as he pointed out, quote, "Engagement is the desired outcome of the terminology of membership," end quote. So this is a change from how historically we've seen religious affiliation in terms of subscription, proximity, and access to goods and services. Daniel, could you talk a bit more about that shift?
Yeah, I love that we dug into that story, because I think a lot of our listeners here will be somewhat familiar with Life.Church and always wonder, how do they go from a church in Edmond, Oklahoma to one of America's largest churches? And part of that is because learning to ebb and flow with the changing understandings of how people understand membership and how people understand how they relate to an organization. For instance, for a lot of folks, when you say the word membership, it invokes something like a Sam's Club membership or a Costco membership. This is especially for those who don't belong, who didn't grow up in the church, who aren't yet believers. They think of membership in that particular way. You're a member of a particular club at school. You're a member, and so it's obligations. It's sometimes even fees that you have to pay, and there's nothing wrong with the term membership, but I think whenever you invoke that term to somebody who hasn't grown up in the church, we're at a place in the history of America where brand loyalty to your religion has changed completely since the 50s and 60s. And so that brand loyalty to a denomination or a tradition or a particular religious upbringing, that's almost completely changed. And so you can't talk about church membership the same way you talk about your Costco membership. Now, for those of us who are working as leaders in the church, that that's not what you're intending to do. But for those who are uninitiated, or for those who always felt like they're at the fringe, the more we emphasize membership, the more it feels like quote unquote legal obligations to a particular organizations, where they can conveniently pull their membership when there's tension, pull their membership when there's disagreement. And so some of these modern challenges come from because of the growing complexity of our family structures, growing complexity of how we understand institutions. And we're all very in different places in how we understand the role of religion in society. And so if you feel like religion is only private, then of course you're not going to pressure others to become members of your organization. Again, that's not how we would describe it as church leaders from the inside, but from the outsider, that's what it often can feel like. Warren, from the research that we've looked at and from the ideas of building a sense of belonging, what are we seeing?
Well, we're seeing that this is not something that just developed post-COVID or in the last year or two, as evidenced by Adelle's story. And incidentally, every chapter in the book has an in-depth story of one church that sort of exemplifies the shift that we're discussing. Going back to the year 2000, Robert Putnam's classic book, Bowling Alone, which takes its name from the dramatic drop in league bowling, Putnam argues that and even back then he saw it and he was very prescient in noticing it early on, and it's just been validated over the years, that civic life is collapsing, that Americans aren't joining as they once did the groups and clubs that promote trust and cooperation. As social capital and collective community engagement have diminished over time, they've been replaced by social isolation. In fact, the U.S. Surgeon General has recently described how social connection is critical to physical and mental health. And in a recent advisory entitled Our Epidemic of Loneliness and Isolation, it isn't just the pandemic that's triggered a rise in mental health concerns from people needing to feel that they belong to community, but the rising generations are increasingly indicating that they want help in forming their identity, even in how young people approach spirituality. As just some of the research we cite, Springtide research has examined a shift in culture that's a prime opportunity for identity shaping the belonging sense of what it means to be a church, not just to attend, not just to have my name on a list, but to shape who I am in community. What a great sense and opportunity of belonging for the church. What a great antidote that is to all we're hearing in today's mental health awareness about isolation, anxiety, and loneliness. Daniel, keep pulling this together.
Well, I want to add to that, Warren, this idea that spaces shape identity and people's identities shape the spaces. You see this 20, 30 years ago when we started using the phrase multi-ethnic church. We tried to create spaces that actually allowed people to further understand their racial, ethnic identity within a particular space. And over time, that value on being a multi-ethnic or being a multiracial church began to shape the kinds of spaces and the kinds of conversations that churches were able to have for the future. And so that's a really important concept, that spaces shape identity and identity shapes spaces. And that's really what we want to encourage leaders in this particular shift, is to explore, to have the courage to explore what does it look like to create new spaces. Sometimes that is physical spaces. Sometimes that is places where people can go to and be able to ask really difficult questions so that they can negotiate some of these questions that they have with leaders of a community. And sometimes it's actually virtual spaces, or sometimes it's actually your leadership being able to be patient with people as they struggle with coming to church, only once a month, or coming to church maybe only a few times a year. What does it mean to give people space as you're trying to allow that space to shape their identity? I think the biggest thing, as we were working through this this chapter in the book, or this shift in the book, was the idea that we can't shame Gen Z for their church attendance patterns. We should celebrate when they're enthusiastic about attending church, but we shouldn't shame them when they're not, because the shaming is definitely going to lead to greater disaffiliation. And so a part of this is also learning to develop language to encourage Gen Zers. And I really do believe that as I listen to Gen Z leaders begin to talk about the challenges that they're experiencing within the church, it should give us courage, because they want to dialogue and they want leaders to be able to reach down to them to have this dialogue with them. So as we get ready to wrap up, Warren, Adelle, any last thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, let me just try to pull this together. The shift from attending to attaching might be epitomized by a couple of questions. The dated question is, how are we going to grow church membership and attendance? Maybe the better question is, how can we help more people develop healthy spiritual relationships in their complex lives? If the trend is experiencing an increased sense of belonging through new pathways where people explore their identity in Christ with others, not just attending and giving, but feelings of being known and seen, and the sense of community that provides the welcoming space that can shape that identity and belonging. And if that ends up being called membership, so much the better.
Well, thanks for joining us for this episode of Exponential Next series, inspired by our book, Becoming a Future Ready Church. We hope that you'll check out the other episodes that you can find on Exponential's YouTube channel.
Take care, everyone.